So this session focuses, as Jodie said, on that final growth accelerator, the idea of finding that new space. And our presentation is designed to inspire you to think differently about that journey, though, to take a different path. Jodie said, to take a bolder path, to finding and realising those new spaces, and to take you on a journey of what we call from marginal to mainstream. But let's start at the beginning. The real challenge here is growth. The fundamental job to be done. It's what every company strives for. But it's tough. There are stagnant economies, competitive categories, and increased commoditisation. The answer to this is to break through growth is innovation. And yet our World Panel data, our friends at World Panel tell us that it's the lowest levels of innovation for a decade. They also tell us that innovation's hard, most innovations fail. And the question we often get asked is, where do you look for that rich new space in which to innovate? And that space has to be right for your brand. And as Jane said this morning, you have to intentionally look for that space. And those who get there, our World Panel friends tell us, it doubles your chances of growth if you can find that new space. But what do we mean by a new space? And it can be different sizes, it can be adjacent categories, but it can also be as small as a new moment or a new occasion. Think about Uber moving into food delivery, or LinkedIn moving into training. Dettol took a journey into home hygiene, all examples of new spaces. Our supermarkets moving into mobile phones is another one. But as I say, it doesn't have to be that big. And actually, I really like that Belvita is an old one, but a good one. That classic moment when they came and they took over the biscuit, the breakfast biscuit occasion. But the thing is, it has to be right for the consumer and how they live their lives. And as we know, one of the hardest things to do is to identify that meaningful, different space for your brand, and then be bold enough to move into it. And that's an important word, be bold enough to move into it. And inspiration from new spaces can come from lots of places, from various sources. You need to have macro forces, you need to have your demand spaces, you need to know your tensions, your culture. The list goes on. But what's important is that you filter that through your brand and meaningful difference to really get you to that value proposition and build around it. But you need the opportunity space. You need your white space. You need to know what the insight is that you're building from. And you need to all the while be thinking about your value proposition. Now, we know how to do this part, but it's all about the quality of the data that goes into this and how different that is and how that can then spark your imagination, and then to have the ability to translate that and, as I said before, be bold enough to act upon it. What if you looked somewhere else? What if you looked at the margins for additional inspiration? It's a tough ask. For those of you who know me, I've worked in R&D, marketing and innovation for 20 years. And I now advise some of the biggest clients in the world. This is the hard stuff for me. This is about finding and realising that new space. Always looking for fresh inspiration and having the bravery and the boldness to step into those spaces. Which is why I was so inspired when I read Helen Edwards' book, because she didn't only lay out the challenge, she also laid a path of what that opportunity might be and how to realise it. So this is Helen's book, From Marginal to Mainstream. There will be copies available later. And in it, Helen takes you on a journey to understand those marginal behaviours, but also shows you along the way, and this is a bit I really love, very strong clues or beacons about how you know whether these behaviours are worth investigating for your particular brand, and then how you might realise them as well. So Helen's now going to take you through her thinking, but then she's also going to talk about the partnership that we've got and the fresh data we've got and how we've come together to bring the best of ourselves to help clients to realise marginal behaviours, and hopefully therefore giving you that boldness to realise the pot of gold. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you. So thank you, Nicki. I guess what kind of started all of this for me was witnessing the remarkable growth of veganism. And frankly, actually being involved with some of the businesses, some of the brands that were kind of scrambling to catch up, that it has taken by surprise. And I wondered if we as marketers, and I think it has to be the marketers, could be a bit better at seeing these things come in, move faster to innovate against them and ride the wave of growth instead of like scrambling to catch up with it. Now, what's really interesting about veganism as a behaviour is that it's not new. Veganism actually dates back to 1944 in the West, when a guy called Donald Watson, I think he's the guy in the middle, started or convened a meeting of 5 other non-dairy vegetarians. They didn't even have a name at that point. And their aim was to create a movement. We all want to create a movement, don't we? They wanted to create a movement. And basically, they wanted to create a movement that was based on their dietary lifestyle choice. And it was about commitment to animal welfare. So the whole reason for doing it for them was about their commitment to animal welfare. They called themselves vegans. They had to come up with a name for themselves. And they called themselves vegans. We all do naming, don't we? And they did this by taking the beginning and the end of vegetarian. There you go. That's how they did that. Apparently, they also considered vegan and benevore, but vegan it was. Okay, so they're in their pub. They've got a publication, Russell. They've got a publication out, and they're starting a movement. They're ready to go. They want to bring all of us on this journey to their dietary lifestyle choice. What happened then? Well, nothing. Nothing at all happened. It was a super marginal choice for about the next 60 years. The issue here was resistance from the mainstream. And that came from the fact that the reason to do it, to be a vegan, animal welfare, was also actually, animals were also the reason not to do it. At the time, people believed that they needed animal nutrients in their diet in order to not just stay healthy, actually, but stay alive. They really believed that they needed animal nutrients. Now, veganism really only took off in 2017. And now, almost all of us, many of us, I would suggest, are a vegan some of the time. We choose the vegan option sometimes. Sometimes we have oat milk in our coffee. Sometimes we don't. It's a growing category. In fact, like many marginal behaviours, it's a multi-category growth fuel. So it's not just one category it's fueling, it's multiple categories. So from not much at all in 2017, the global vegan food and drink market is worth about 23 billion. The vegan beauty industry, 18 billion, and clothing around 600 million, and they're all growing globally. And in fact, if we just take one data point, some of the research that I've just done, that we at the team of Kantar have just done, suggests that this growth actually isn't going anywhere and could accelerate. This is just one data point, but we've got others that we can share with you from this research. But actually, do you know what? The point I really want to make here at this point is that businesses, marketers, they didn't invent, they didn't innovate veganism. Consumers did. Veganism, mindfulness and the sleep category, even exercise and its associated categories are examples of consumer-driven disruption. Now, we talk about disruption all the time, don't we, in innovation, in marketing, and usually what we mean is the notion of disruptive innovation that comes from the brilliant work of Clayton Christensen. And it's often misunderstood, actually, but what he actually meant was an innovation, a technical innovation that can cut across an entire category and change it forever. That's what disruptive innovation is, coming from the work of Clay Christensen. And if you think about it, what that is innovation that comes from us. That's supply-side innovation. That's what we and our clever R&D people do. And it's great. It's a real fuel for growth. But what I'm talking about is innovation that comes the other way around. It's demand-driven innovation. It's coming from consumers. And it's just as forceful, and it's just as powerful. And of course, like supply-driven disruption, there will be winners and losers. You know, there are going to be vegan food categories who were very popular but did not see the mass market coming and didn't adapt to it, and they won't exist anymore. So consumer-driven disruption has the power to foster new industries, create new categories, and it will also create winners and losers. Now, there are more marginal behaviours out there right now. When we did our research a couple of years ago, we found 50 of them. Some of them will take off, some of them won't. But the ones that will fuel this multi-category growth. Let's look at a few of them now. Polyamory, I think, might be the one that you were referring to. Yeah. Let's look at some of them now. Every one of these actually has its intense advocates. Some of these you'll know, some of them you won't. There will be less than 3% of the population practicing them now. And it's important to say what we're talking about here is a lifestyle choice first, not a consumption choice first. It starts with, this is the way I want to live my life. And then consumption becomes part of it. So what have we got here? We've got microdosing. That's the practice of taking very small amounts of magic mushrooms, psilocybin, just to get a little lift during the day. And it was made popular, actually, by a lawyer in an American TV show called The Good Fight. She was a microdoser. Home burial, well, that one's obvious, isn't it? But in fact, it also encompasses a whole spectrum of different ways to dispose of and remember our loved ones. Quantified self, this one I think many of you will know. That's the daily measuring of personal metrics to just understand a bit more about what's going on and to make small improvements. And I reckon a lot of healthcare systems around the world are going to be looking to this as money becomes tighter and tighter. Uniform wardrobe. Everyday decision fatigue kind of drives this one. Famously, Steve Jobs wore more or less the same thing every day because, you know, he would have much better things to think about than what to wear. Urophagia, drinking your own urine. Yeah, I know. But there are advocates out there, strong advocates who believe it's very good for your health. So we found 50 of these, right, when we did our original research. Some of these are going to go, some of these are going to take off, some of these are going to be the next veganism, some of them aren't. And one of the big ambitions when I started this work about 3 years ago was to see if you could read these behaviours better, if you could understand their behaviour better. So rather than just land them like a trends presentation and go, there's this trend and there's that trend and there's this behaviour, it was kind of, well, what's the point of that if we don't really know, if there is a way of knowing better which ones might take off? And thankfully, one of the most important discoveries we found when we did this work was that you can understand, you can read these behaviours and their potential better. So taking some of the guesswork away. And actually not just that. As marketers, and again, it's the marketers in the room that have to do it, you can take actions to propel them on their journey into the mainstream. So we call these beacons because they're kind of like signs, signals, clues, motifs, ways of thinking that, if you like, light the path to mainstream popularity. Now, there's 8 of them, which is inconvenient. And don't worry, I'm not going to now... I am going to go through them, but we won't plough through them one by one. But think of them as lenses of analysis, ways of thinking and thinking about opportunity creation. So what I'm going to do now is briefly show you how they work through the lens of the journey of veganism. And we're going to take them 2 by 2 because they kind of come in pairs. Okay, so how does this work? So saying you wanted to look at one of these behaviours for yourself, you would use the same lens of these beacons to do that. Now, the absolute foundational beacons are the imposing forces of intensity on the one hand and resistance on the other. So intensity is absolutely vital. And what we're talking about here are the Donald Watsons, the passionate zealots and advocates who really believe in this and believe that it's mad that the rest of us aren't doing it. And you need this intensity. You need this intensity because without it, a behaviour will just trickle away. And you need them to believe in it through the difficulties of adopting that marginal behaviour. Because if you think about it, and if any of you were early uptakers of veganism, usually adopting a marginal behaviour is less socially acceptable, less convenient, and more expensive. And veganism was all of those things to start with. So you need the intense advocates, otherwise it isn't going anywhere. But the opposing force to that intensity is the resistance, right? It's the resistance of the mainstream that says, well, you know, that might be all right for you, but that's not for me. And sometimes it's like, that's not even all right for you. And with veganism, this pushback was primarily about the concerns about nutrition. It wasn't that they disagreed about animal welfare. It was that they felt they needed animal products for their health. Now, these two forces are crucial to understand because they're volatile. They move over time, especially resistance. And it's also, resistance is not one-dimensional. So what we found in the original research, and we found it again in the research that we've just done, is that resistance is nuanced. Beneath that superficial, no thank you, what you find are different types of resistance. And we dug in to understand what those were. Rather than run away and go, okay, you don't like it, we'll find something else. We dug in to understand the resistance. So you can resist it because you think it's literally dangerous. And some people think that about microdosing. It's a mind-altering drug. Don't do it. It could kill you. Through various shades of disgust and weirdness, insect protein sits somewhere there. It's disgusting. That's a bit weird. Through to something that's more idealistic, like, oh, isn't that lovely for you? That's nice. Off you go and do that. To, it's impractical, but I'm kind of interested. So an example of that might be homeschooling, for example. I can see the advantages of this, but cool, I don't know how to put that one together. Or polyphasic sleeping. I've got to be up and in the office. So, and what's obvious from this is that the more to that end, the resistance is, the harder it is to break through. The more to this end, the more potential there is for the behaviour to take off, but also there's more potential for business to be the ones that help with that practicality or move it into the more idealistic space for a larger audience. So that's intensity. You need it for traction. Resistance. You need to understand the nature of your resistance and work out what you could do to break through it. 3 and 4 of the 8 are vectors and accelerators, and they're external factors. So vectors, very simply, are bigger tribal groups that have adopted the behaviour as part of their culture, actually. So in the case of veganism, interestingly, both hippies and punks, being a vegan was part of being a hippie and a punk. And what's interesting about that, and the reason they're vectors, is these bigger subcultures have the power to bring that behaviour to a more mainstream audience. So hippies and punks had parents and siblings and friends, and they would introduce, if you like, that particular behaviour through the wider subculture. So you need to look and see if there are any bigger vectors that could be working in your favour. And then there's accelerators. I think most of us would be familiar with the notion of accelerators. So these are external factors. They could be political, legal, social, cultural factors that could give a behaviour a shove, basically. COVID pandemic gave a lot of behaviours a shove, not least distance learning was a marginal behaviour for ages. Now, digital learning, as we might call it, has really taken off, and a lot of, including the institution I work for, is scrabbling to catch up with it. Now, with veganism, it was more knowledge, and in particularly scientific research and published research about the benefits of a plant-based diet. Those were key accelerators. Plus, if anyone remembers it, the horse meat scandal. What a nightmare that was. That was also a shove. So one to look out for, for example, actually, is a change in legislation on microdosing. I know I keep mentioning microdosing. Read into that what you will. But I think we will see a change in legislation pretty soon on microdosing. So vectors and accelerators can give a behaviour momentum, and you need to know if they're present. Next up, 5 and 6 are usually present when things start to happen. Misalignment. Now, this might always be there, but you've really got to know about it if it is. And it's important because it's so powerful. Misalignment is when the advocates and the resistors are sort of talking past each other. And the veganism, so if you think about it, veganism wasn't resisted because people felt the slaughter of animals was perfectly okay. You know, so we had Watson and his group going, don't eat meat, you mustn't slaughter animals. The resistors weren't saying, no, it's okay to slaughter animals. The resistors were saying, oh, but I need to be healthy. They were literally just talking past each other. So when people began to feel that they didn't need animal nutrients anymore, when that conversation changed, the whole thing just took off. So misalignment provides an opportunity, and it gives businesses an opportunity to come in between those two sides and change that conversation and build reconciliation and reduce resistance. And then you've got a powerful growth because the resistance is misaligned. But if you can change that misalignment, then it begins to go. And when people begin to start seeing things differently, the other opportunity is reframing, which has also come up already this morning. We talk about it a lot. It's changing that conceptual viewpoint. It's very powerful. And in the case of veganism, the word vegan really did that the word plant-based really did that because veganism and being a vegan was associated with sort of activism and confrontation, whereas plant-based sort of softened it, made it easier for people to buy into, more accessible. And then the final two are really when a behaviour is on its way into the mainstream. Reversal. So if you think about it, resistance can come down slowly and the growth can happen slowly. But sometimes what happens is a rapid change. Something goes into reversal. It's a switchback. And in the case of veganism, it was health that was that gravitational force. So for years, the reason not to be a vegan was health. And then the reason to be a vegan was health. And when you get that switchback, you get a huge momentum coming behind it. And it's not the only marginal behaviour where that happened. We saw it in exercise for its own sake as well. So the potential for reversal needs to be looked for when you're looking at these marginal behaviours. And finally, when a behaviour is well on its way to the mainstream, you get the opportunity for dilution. And that starts when you've got that curious resistance at the end of the spectrum, and you as a business might be able to help people do this behaviour a little bit some of the time, choose it sometimes, to take away the kind of all-in nature of some of these behaviours. So, you know, plant-based, flexitarian are all forms of dilution. So the research I did for this book, original quant, qual, ethnography, and case analysis, showed me that as marketers, we don't have to play catch up. We don't have to make it a risky move. You can understand these behaviours better. And the latest research that we've just done, more quantitative research, lots of digital analytics, means that we've got case studies of the top 10 behaviours through the lenses of those beacons. And you can come and talk to us and find out more. So I think we need to be looking to marginal behaviours as part of our innovation, not just because they've been neglected. I think it's been an area that's been neglected, but because I think we're going to see more marginal behaviours coming to the fore more often. And there are three big reasons why. First is demographics. Gen Z, biggest single generation in history. Anyone who's done any first-hand research with them, which we have, are struck by their lack of tribalism, their open-mindedness, non-judgmental attitude. And with that comes an increasing interest in marginal behaviours. Streaming, Netflix, Apple, Disney, Amazon, they all need content, they all need eyeballs. Some of the cheapest content to produce is human interest stories. And these bring and normalise these marginal behaviours, this type of content. You know, New Lives in the Wild has brought things like homeschooling or living with no money into a sort of more mass market. And finally, social media brings open audiences. Wicca, modern-day witchcraft, and its associated values of modern-day feminism and ritual has just been built through TikTok. You know, WitchTok, I think, has got over 50 billion views. So social media are really important. Three reasons why I think we'll see it growing faster. So fuel for growth, an angle to explore for innovation, is consumer-driven disruption. How do you do it? Could you add it to your innovation actions? Well, one thing you can be certain of is if you don't, entrepreneurs will. You know, they are already out there. So Yora is a pet food using insect protein. Recompose, worth a look, is composting for the human body. I think it's kind of lovely. You become a nutrient-rich soil to put on your rose bed or something. It's nice. Mendy is a headset that quantifies brain activities. It quantifies self to the brain. Entrepreneurs are out there. How do you do it? Well, we've worked together on a 3-stage process. Come and find out more. It's pretty much what you'd expect: exploration, evaluation, execution. But what's really important, and what we've worked so hard on, is it's supported by multi-method research. And the whole point of this research is to do what entrepreneurs can't do, really, which is to lower the risk when looking at marginal behaviours and actually inspire practical actions. So a process and research back to reduce the risk and give us practical actions. If you want to find out more, we'll all be in the Ignite Zone to talk about it. One interesting point is they're all growing. Low base, of course, because they're marginal, but they're all growing in the latest research. So that adds fuel to that fire, I think, to look at it. Look, we started this session by talking about the challenge of growth. We can't keep looking in the usual places. We've got to look in some unusual places too. And I think the margins, these behaviour choices, have real potential, and I think they've been neglected in innovation plans. And yet there's so much potential, isn't there, to add value to people's lives because they're interested in them, and at the same time add value to your businesses.